Austin, who all are we expecting this morning?
I have not heard anyone, or there's Danielle,
Mhm.
and there's Jeff. So technically we do have a quorum, unless you wanted to wait a minute or two to see if Mitch and John are able to join us.
Yeah, let's wait a minute.
Okay. In addition to normal staff, we also have Rob from UDA joining us for the West End Small Area Plan. I'm not seeing Rob yet, so I'm going to send him an email.
Hi, Austin. I'm here. I just can't, for some reason, my camera is not.
Hey, Rob.
Hey, let me just see here.
Thanks for joining us.
Sure thing.
If your camera doesn't at least work, we should be able to still, I should be able to still give you the presenter duties to share at the very least.
Okay, great.
When that's time.
Okay.
I have another meeting at 10, so can we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I was just about to say it.
Okay.
If you wanted to call us to order.
Okay, I call this June 1st, 2021 Design Review Board Urban Design Panel Workshop to order.
Good morning, everyone. We have technically two items for our Thursday meeting. One that has been deferred, so just getting right into our business item, both 734 and 702 South Main Street. And then we also have for other business a presentation by Rob Robertson of UDA for the West End Small Area Plan. If you have not been able to review the minutes as of yet sent to you on Friday, please review for approval on Thursday. And if any of you believe you have a conflict of interest, please let staff know, and we can get those documents filled out by Thursday as well. We have no old business, but two items of new business. The first item is for a rooftop bar and storefront alterations at 734 South Main Street. This would be above the current, or this would be at the current placement of On the Rocks bar. They are essentially looking to do what most, well, I guess I should add, these are the historic survey card pictures. As you can see, at least the bottom storefront has been heavily revised over the years, but the top layer has been relatively consistent, though, of course, modernized a little bit. Excuse me. Again, the rooftop bar, the second floor would also be converted into a restaurant. The rooftop bar is for that restaurant, in which case they're showing a bar feature with a pergola and restrooms towards the rear back here with a emergency staircase out the rear. In addition to that, there is storefront revisions. The current insert is being removed, and I can actually, this one's a little bit better. The current insert here with doors on either side is being removed for a more flat panel design with two doorways. Staff is recommending approval, but with specific conditions. One of those conditions being that this front entryway be revised to reestablish the inserts for the doorways. and I can answer any questions that you may have at this time for the Thursday meeting.
Danielle, we can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay. Don't know what happened since last time. I'll check it. I was wondering, what is the material of the new emergency egress staircase?
It's a good question.
I could not see it anywhere on the plans.
It appears to be wood, though I can get that more heavily addressed before the next meeting.
Okay, and is wood an acceptable material for fire egress?
That would be up to the fire department, or the building services department. I can't answer that myself.
I don't believe it is.
But we can definitely
But-
get that answered in the meantime.
Okay, thank you.
Austin, you said that one of the recommendations is to reestablish the door inserts. Help me understand what you mean by that. You mean the recess where the doors are?
Yeah, so if right now they're showing that these two doors not be in recessed as the current doorways, and as noted, pretty much the entire street fronts of the West End typically have a recessed doorway, especially on the side with the especially the historic buildings within the historic district. So the recommendation is for a 2-member committee to review the storefront revisions pending reassessment of the doorways.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's what you meant. That's what I thought you meant. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely.
Austin, I had a question on that as well. We're not really given an existing floor plan, but on the first floor plan, you can see the area that's proposed for demolition where the existing inset is. And if we go back to the applicant and require that inset be recreated, and it quite obviously forces them to find another location for that elevator.
That may definitely be a portion of it. I can't exactly speak to every building code issue with how access. I believe that they were already needing to revise the elevator location because its entryway was right next to the stairway. However, since that was internal, that wasn't necessarily needed to be finalized for DRB.
Okay, my question is this: the inset for the door that you recommend. Obviously, the existing building has one central inset with 2 doors, and what they proposed is 2 new doors on opposite ends of the street front facade. My question is the inset on the front facade required, or is it a recommendation?
Is a recommendation by staff. One issue is that if they continued on or if DRB approved the current format, this would not pass building codes because the doorways cannot enter onto the sidewalk as is. That'd be against the building code. So they would have to look into an inward swung door, which can be allowed under certain circumstances, but I'm not exactly sure if it can be allowed under this circumstance. And that, providing the insets also provides that they could still do the outward swing doors from a building code perspective as well.
Okay. The only other question I had at this time is in regard to the comment regarding the height of the pergola.
Mhm.
Okay, and if I'm looking at
The issue
comment
here
4,
is
the
that
ceiling height of the pergola shall not exceed 8 feet from finished floor. The height of the bar addition shall not exceed the height of the pergola. So height of the roofed area is not an issue, apparently. Do we know what the height of the pergola is relative to finished floor at the roof?
we do not know that height as of right now, and the issue is that depending on the rendering, whether we're looking at just the straight facade rendering or if we go to the 3D rendering, the pergola appears at two different heights, and the cross member width
Yes.
is also at two different widths. So we were trying to find conditions to alleviate any concerns upon that discrepancy.
Okay. One other thing, the 18-inch siding material, Austin, are you familiar with what that is? Is that a panel product or is that a lap product?
I believe it's a panel product, not a lab.
Okay, so it appears it has horizontal seams.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have for the moment.
And I believe the applicant is on right now. So if any of these questions do arise again, they can certainly address them at the formal meeting on Thursday to confirm any and all questions that you may have.
One last comment, the rendition of the shielding material around the mechanicals is different on the plans from the renderings. So I'm assuming we go by the renderings.
That is another question that can be that the applicant may resolve, or the board could condition one way or the other. Whether you prefer this type screening or if you prefer the 3D rendering screening.
I just want to make a comment really quickly, and this is really directed at all applicants, but driven by what we see here. We need to be sure that when things are being submitted to the board, that they are consistent. It makes it difficult for us to make decisions if things are different from drawing to drawing and we have no idea which is the actual proposal. And it makes it difficult to write a report, I would guess, from the staff's point of view. So I would just encourage all applicants to please try to make sure that their drawings are consistent from rendering to plan to elevations. Thanks.
I agree. We've run into problems with that when we thought we'd approved one thing and they built something else that was somewhere else in the drawing. So that's a very good point. If that can help at all, I would like to mention, since we're working on this, that I'm not crazy about that suburban backyard fence material for the shielding of those mechanicals. I wish we would see more urban materials.
And that is something that the board could address with a condition if the board feels glad to do that.
Yes, that may be something that you wish to include with the two-member board review. If either material is not up to what you believe is acceptable. Any further questions? If not, item B, which is 702 South Main Street, has asked for deferral. So if you believe that it should be deferred, that can be accepted with your acknowledgement of the agenda for Thursday. Going to there we go, other business. I'm going to hand this off to Rob Robertson, who is of Urban Design Associates out of Pittsburgh, who has been working, and his team has been working on the West End small area plan with staff and the community members. And Rob, I just gave you the presenting duties, so you should be able to share.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks, Austin. Let me see if I can get it on the Adobe itself rather than the whole screen. There we go. Okay, great. Hey, thanks everybody for taking the time. We wanted to go through the progress we're making on the small area plan for the West End. You may remember that we were also working on one for South Downtown, just the area south of County Square last year, and that's undergoing mobility studies now so that we can figure out exactly how streets support future development. Here in the West End, what we were finding as we started to do the plan is that with the rapid change that's happening within the West End and the number of different conditions of zoning, both zoning districts that are adjacent to each other and the relationship between new buildings and existing buildings was becoming difficult to manage because there was no, while the zoning's in place, there was no expressed vision really of how the different neighborhoods within the West End were going to grow in a coherent way. So the idea behind this, and we'll get into the details in a minute, or the approach, was to look at it as a whole again now, given what's happening within the West End, and try to get these different redevelopment initiatives tied together so that we start to see the West End and its many different facets, its different neighborhoods, the different what we would call precincts, and what the vision would be going forward. So as we look ahead in the coming year and think about the changes, potential changes to the land management ordinance and perhaps the zoning criteria, we wanted to first establish principles about what's the consensus about how the whole area should evolve, and what are those edges where you change scale and change typologies very often, and how do those transitions occur? Because that's where a lot of the, I think a lot of the friction is. So in doing this, we wanted to back up and see if we could understand if there are specific character areas within the West End that we can use as a basis going forward. There was also a lot of discussion about connectivity between neighborhoods in the West End, and particularly when you get up to the big streets like Academy, or you're crossing Pendleton or South Main, or trying to get to Augusta. Can we make that better? And the notion that when we're fronting streets, common streets or park spaces, is there an attitude about what we're trying to do as a whole cloth rather than just individual building by building? And as I mentioned, the changing scales between buildings. So we're kind of in the third stage of that. We started really just canvassing the neighborhood, neighbors, businesses, community representatives. So we've been going through a series of meetings, both with a smaller group of community leaders and representatives and folks who have or stakeholders like institutions, the ball stadium, the neighborhood association, and so on, to begin to test ideas about these character areas, and then start to test options. And we've been doing that, and now we think we've arrived at pretty good consensus. And as we start to draft a small area plan, I just wanted to have a little session with you, and because you touch so many things coming through here, and get some advice and counsel on what you think are important issues to address as we go forward, and just to take a look too at what's happening. So we sort of start with the existing land use policies, which, as we all know, are buried in the details within zoning guidelines. And of course, we've got the C4 in the red that is roughly half of the study area for the West End. The West End study area is highlighted here. There's a little boundary around it. It's not everything. It's this close-in group of neighborhoods that really the focus for us. So it doesn't go north of Academy, for instance, or east of Augusta Street. And Augusta Street, by the way, we dealt with a stretch of this in the South Downtown plan. So those tend to be consistent visions. When we look at the patterns and walk the neighborhoods and sort of see what's emerging behind the major corridors, of course, we inherit this kind of fabric of colliding grids, partial streets, some streets that used to go through that don't go through anymore, and intersections that are signalized here so that we can understand the movement a bit more and how people are circulating or are not. And also the different characters between the streets, because not all streets are equal particularly as an urban street type. And as we add buildings of scale, it brings, I think, a particular kind of pressure on the way those streets work. Looking at building patterns that are there, just the footprints, and also the pattern of surface parking lots and vacant land, those things, oddly enough, are almost in balance. So we begin to look at the opportunity sites that are clear, that are being changed and becoming new development parcels as we move forward. In our canvassing of participants, we ask, among other things, what are the most important things to address for folks? And as people responded, we kind of sort of drop out into these general categories. There was this preservation of character, of course, is always a big issue in a changing urban environment like that. Appropriate scale, too. I think early on, folks not really seeing the scale of urbanism change gradually, but all at once, where you have for instance, a big apartment building landing in adjacent to a single family neighborhood, gets everybody's attention real quick, and people start asking questions like, what are we going to be when we grow up? What's happening to us? There's a lot of sense too that it's important to prioritize both local character and local businesses, and try to avoid becoming a generic sort of franchise, if you will, or commercial commodity kind of building and character along the streets. A lot of concern about that. And then the need to really look at the tools we have and to revise them as appropriate for where we're trying to go. So one of the areas that has been, and I'll go through these quickly, has been the focus of a lot of new proposals that are changing scale would be Perry Avenue and the neighborhoods around that: McCall, Calhoun, Watson, Grace, Wade, a lot of small scale streets within this area. And people came back and they liked this little kind of precinct of single family, or what we were calling the cottage neighborhoods, and did not want to lose that. Thought it represented great stock of small scale single family and either attached or detached housing that was really difficult to get back. And as scale changes, you lose that whole part of the DNA for the West End. There are not a lot of public parks unless you're going to Unity Park or down to the river or over to the high school as open space. So how do you do that as the neighborhood develops, integrate those? And then can we be more nuanced in the way that we're integrating new buildings that are different than the existing character of buildings that are in the neighborhood so that it works better between them. Walkability and connectivity was one of those things as well. Pendleton, which we think is a street that's, we know it's just in the early stages of major change coming. And what, you know, where do we want to direct that? You know, what does it want to be? So there's a lot of ideas about much better pedestrian connectivity, sidewalks. It's 4 lanes of moving traffic. Can we turn that from a highway orientation of, you know, curb cuts everywhere and parking lots all along the street to saying, okay, this is an urban place. Let's change the criteria for building relationships to the street, make that street much more of a complete street. What kind of uses along Pendleton? Big question for folks. And then the ever-present need for a grocery store close by were the sort of top takeaways from Pendleton. South Main Street, which you were just dealing with, the whole small-scale shopping street, the legacy of that, the individual storefronts and local character. How do we not lose that? How does this not get replaced by big buildings with more generic storefronts? And on a small scale, little shopping street like this overwhelm the sense of place on that street. And people talked a lot about the missing teeth along South Main and wanting to get rid of parking lots that create these gaps between for the experience along South Main Street. So, you know, looking at those few areas, we talked about this idea of, you know, let's set some very distinct character areas or precincts within the West End and begin to think about the edges between other uses or the kinds of buildings and the scale of buildings that might go in each precinct, and they may be different from one precinct to the next. So we've used this idea of a matrix of buildings, building types, land uses, general land uses here, and setbacks is a way to start introducing ideas for how the ordinance might change over time to really reflect these kind of nuanced changes. And then also include on that some standards for just generic building types. And we started working on that. And one thing that we're finding, particularly as we mash up against older single family neighborhoods that are really residual pieces of broader neighborhoods that were in Greenville, but they're constantly under, of course, under pressure on all the edges to densify and then change. So the notion is, what is the degree of change, and are we just wiping this, setting a stage for wiping the slate clean so that those are no longer relevant kind of building types or places within many of the neighborhoods we're working in? Had same issue in South Downtown, as a matter of fact. Or are there more nuanced changes allowed within within each of these precincts? So we started looking at building typologies in a couple of ways, particularly in single-family residential, historically single-family residential neighborhoods. Is there a more defined typology? So in a neighborhood that's dominated like the Cottage Precinct or the Perry Avenue neighborhoods, would they be small residential buildings that stay in there? We're really 1- and 2-story character now, that sort of stay in that range, but allowing for higher densities by attaching, but not attaching 20 together. It may be limited to 3 or 4. And if you're going to do medium scale residential buildings, they may have street frontages that are more appropriate for that, like on the big crossing streets, or even small urban buildings that could be small little condo or apartment buildings that are 3 stories and maybe a step back for the 4th in scale. And then when you get up to medium urban buildings, up to sort of 6 stories and particular lengths, or large urban buildings that we should start to define those. You know, it's interesting when you go in these smaller scale neighborhoods now, and, you know, we see buildings that are 400 feet long, or buildings that are wrapping parking that now occupy the whole block on all four edges. You know, what does that mean for us in a design context going forward? How do those buildings relate? So there are some things that are already hardwired into the design guidelines for the central business district, and those are enforced, like along South Main Street. But on other streets, like from Academy to Calhoun, for instance, where it's out of the C4 district, and now we're dealing with multiple zoning districts like RDV or RM2, do we need to reconsider how those districts really meet each other, and how big buildings might need to step down when they're adjacent to smaller buildings, or reflect that across the street? So we're starting to noodle with that as an idea. People do respond to it in different ways. You know, some just like no big buildings. Others, yeah, we are in an urban, you know, in an urban neighborhood. These are going to happen. So how do they happen in a way that acknowledges what's around them? So we look at the portrait of existing conditions, and we kind of go through and code by building use and by building types. And then as we think about where are the likely vacant, a lot of vacant property that is likely to infill, or property that's underdeveloped that is likely to infill, what do we want to have happen within the West End and within each of the idea of these character precincts? So we went back into this area and began to look at both the adjacencies and the areas that we're studying within the district. So the Sterling neighborhood, which is in the green over to the west side, is not in the study area, but it shares the same relationship to Pendleton, a commercial corridor that Perry does. So some of the lessons that we're learning, or that we're starting to take action on within the West End, may also be appropriate for Sterling. So for instance, the street behind, just on the other side of Pendleton, is Arlington. It's getting a lot of redevelopment, but there seemed to be no real coherent vision for those blocks about what should happen on one side or the other. We've got, you know, office uses and commercial uses that are splitting the block perpendicular to Pendleton and Arlington. Things dropping in with no frontage necessarily on the street, but creating internal frontages. So it's kind of a dog's breakfast over there in many of these sort of edge conditions. So we've turned that idea into what we call a regulating plan, which would divide it up by these precincts. We've got the river precinct, which of course is fronting the river and has the large hospitality uses. South Main becomes its own precinct, and it crosses all of these other ones too. So there's this kind of layering that happens in a prioritization for frontage along Augusta and along South Main Street. So we see those as sort of a pair, have very similar characteristics to them, and probably rules for how development could occur going forward. The Loft precinct around Markley and all the old warehouses that were residual, and the development on either side of that going to the stadium, the Cottage precinct around Perry, and the residential, smaller scale residential neighborhoods, and then the Pendleton precinct along that street. So what we're doing is starting to identify frontages that we want to make sure that may have also active uses engaging the street, but building frontage nonetheless. So for instance, where we're showing buildings here, there's nothing but surface parking lots now. So beginning to think about character and scale in those coming back, and how we create whole streets that are great places to walk around. And then listing it in urban design recommendations. So for instance, on this side, this downtown density we think is still appropriate for the highest density and biggest buildings, if you will, coming together to build this precinct. We think that there's additional public parking as this precinct grows, which might service the convention or conference uses and continued hospitality uses and restaurants there. More pedestrian connections. It looks like there's an opportunity if we can work it out along Academy Street, not within the right of way, but just outside, some within the right of way, some outside the right of way, where we might be able to get a dedicated multi-use trail that connects with Swamp Rabbit Trail. Could get you all the way to Markley when you look at the tolerances. So that's a connectivity initiative that is being proposed. Is worthwhile to begin to explore that a little bit further. Still, the character along South Main Street is top of mind for a lot of folks. We've got pretty good regulations for that, but reinforcing those is important. And then more plazas and small public spaces being integrated into that district as it evolves. So this district will have its own little matrix, talk about building types that are appropriate in there, and we'll have this for you to review and give us comments back as this evolves. So we did the same for South Main and Augusta, very different building typologies along these frontages, different setback criteria as well on some of these streets. And again, what was coming back from the neighborhood is like these are signature streets. People feel that really connect to Greenville's evolution over time, and there's a sense of not wanting to lose all of that in the redevelopment. And also, there was an early idea about this being pretty art-centric as a kind of environment. And after the West End Village, while we have moments of that in the core of the district where people are not really seeing it, they look to Augusta and South Main to be able to express those ideas. And so in working with folks, we're sort of looking at the South Main frontage, and you can see empty building lots on the right-hand side. And this is O'Neill Street that goes through to South Main, and of course the missing teeth all along the street. And we look at those opportunities, look at the scale of the existing buildings, talk about the maximum 30-foot or 3-story height at the street frontage here. And then this idea, particularly in this stretch, which is in what we're calling the loft precinct, built off of the idea of the warehouse precinct, about how we might begin to think about materiality, character, and what kind of street that makes over time as redevelopment occurs. So we've got this stretch looking towards the stadium from O'Neill. We've got the empty lots. We're looking back the other way now. Almost this entire side of South Main on that eastern side is unoccupied, roughly until you get towards Augusta and South Main. So those kind of guidelines, crossing over with where we'd like to do some increased setbacks at the corner of particularly of South Main and where the railroad tracks come through, so that we can create a public plaza in addition to dining terraces and pedestrian ways in front. But this is meant to talk to folks about this idea of keeping the frontage along South Main modulated, whereas the buildings may be big as they step back, but there's this kind of stepping towards the street. Same thing for Augusta, where we get the current conditions. We're looking at we're on Field Street, looking at Augusta, and as this becomes the 365 district and the entertainment focus for entertainment uses, the idea that the other end of that street would also become a public park, building setback scaled down to the Augusta frontage. And on Augusta, particularly on the that north side of Augusta as it goes through here, is creating deeper setbacks because it's got a tiny little public realm, and for buildings to create more spill out space in a broader opportunity to get pedestrians moving through there and have that space animated more with a little more distance. So those get coded through for building heights, building types, special setbacks, desirable setbacks. Same for the loft precinct, where both of those front doors, Augusta and South Main, create that setting, but in and around what's happening at the stadium, we feel this is kind of a great catalyst for consolidating the way development feels here as the infill pieces come in, and the Jackson Way development is going vertical now, and we know that there's more redevelopment to happen along the edges here. So those recommendations, of course, are to preserve that character, integrate public spaces where we can, and we think on the Greenville Transit site, as that redevelops, that's a great place. That's where you saw the Augusta Park at one end and the little South Main Street Terrace at the other end. That could contribute good public space to the neighborhood. We also think that there is a great opportunity to create a stadium walk on this site that's on the eastern side of the stadium that connects South Main and Augusta together. And that maybe architecture within the loft precinct is responding a bit more to the DNA of the warehouses that grew up along the tracks. So it's taking any cues from that, pretty much like the stadium did. And you see a few of the buildings that will fit into that kind of ethic. And so looking at all of this, you can sort of see from the air, the GTA site in the red. It has there are other property owners in there too. It's not all GTA. So I call it the Augusta Triangle, because you can't really tell what's happening in the middle. You only know the edges. But this as the sort of core of the emerging loft precinct, the scale of buildings within that triangle we think can be bigger. The frontage on South Main and the frontage on Augusta can also respond to that scale, so that there's a split in the way that buildings are asked to front those two spaces. Again, this comes with its own precinct standards. The cottage precinct we talked about, this is where we get a lot of times the most activity and zoning approvals, and where the planning team is spending a lot of their work as new development comes in to what's appropriate. What do we really, what do we want to protect and allow to grow back? To what degree do we want to densify this or completely change the character and scale of this little precinct? So we've got active proposals in here now that are upping the density for sure. There's a lot of discussion about what's the right balance here. How do we know the cottage precinct at the end of the day, or will the city's policy be just ultimately to replace it with higher density development? So the other thing that's happening here, a lot of new single family detached housing has been built over the last decade, a lot. So there's a kind of encouragement, if you will, or integration of that within the pattern. So what are the rules of the game adjacent to those uses? And with Pendleton as a commercial street, how the transition zones work from parking lots and dumpsters and trash pickup and lighting to a single family residential precinct. How do we address those issues? So we've looked at opportunity sites. There's a state office building site there that over time, it's highly likely that will redevelop. So what should be, as it splits district, what should be the face of that block on each of its edges, as it really responds to two very different kinds of addresses? And so this just demonstrates an opportunity to have a mixed use development there, but have the frontage on Perry being more sympathetic to residential uses there, actually integrating its open space requirements, perhaps in a linear park along Perry, so that you create a new setting within that neighborhood that reinforces that. And then on the Pendleton side, it gets pretty urban. So we're dealing with that precinct. Pendleton, we talked about starting to change the body language in relationships of how buildings are sited to the street, knowing that we need to get cross easements, start eliminating some of the curb cuts and bringing parking in off the side streets instead of a free-for-all along Pendleton. So we've begun looking at how we might integrate in bike infrastructure and better pedestrian experience here. It's fast-moving traffic, 4 lanes. It ain't fun to walk along the side of the street. And buildings, you see 2 in the lower right-hand corner, 2 new redevelopments starting to inch up, but it's clear that nobody knows what that public space is between the street and the building. So we're looking at the idea of reducing lanes there, thinking about this as a kind of village main street, if you will, in the West End. And what's happening here is it's largely redevelopment of some offices and related uses like that, this may be a great scale for Pendleton. And trying to take some of the lessons from the West End Village, where it was the same 4 lanes. The city was able to work with the state, add on-street parking, add another layer of landscape that makes the street much more crossable, much more functional for pedestrians and for shop owners who are using this as largely as a commercial address. So to take Pendleton from where it is today to look at 3 or 4 alternatives for integrating in either cycle tracks, which are protected, widening sidewalks into multi-use pathways, adding on-street parking on both sides, slow traffic down a little bit and create more opportunities for parking there, or separating bicycle tracks. So this is sort of where we're studying right now. We're starting to work with the state and what's acceptable and what they want to see as we embark. But we thought on Pendleton is a really interesting street. The residual used to be residential, largely residential, a lot of large old residential houses, still 3 or 4 left, that this may be a street that changes its character by block. And we'll see how that evolves, but some blocks, like the blocks on the left, those had some of the houses that were remaining as office buildings now, different buildings, but retaining that character a little bit along Pendleton. So it's not one size fits all for every block along that street. So we've begun to work on that for a whole different set of criteria. So that's kind of the format for the small area plan. And I wanted to ask you, as you've been, dealing with the design guidelines and I'm sure proposals in the West End and other places, what's helpful to you, as we think about this small area plan and starting to set some criteria for updated land management ordinance or design guideline criteria within areas like the West End? What should our priorities be from your perspective?
I'll just interject. Thank you for that presentation, Rob. That was great. But I'm guessing our actual discussions should take place on our Thursday meeting. Is that what I understand, or do we do this now, or help me understand, Jay or Austin?
Hi, Carmela. This opportunity was provided to allow you to provide comments now, as we were keeping the Thursday meeting for specifically the items, the applications for items.
Got it. Okay.
Turned in.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to, Camilla, because there's a lot here, and there's a lot I would like to hear from you guys. So I'm Austin, Jay, Courtney, and team. I'm happy to tune in also again to get more detailed comments if we think that's better. Any off-the-cuff comments you have now about the approach, I'd appreciate. I understand, the devil's in the details as you start to look at that. But I thought I thought there were a couple of things I found, as we come at, because as urban designers, we're coming at this as architects largely, and then looking at what are we making here? At the end of the day, it's so fragmented. What are we doing? What is this place supposed to feel like? And a lot of, in South Downtown, a little bit the same way, we weren't working with County Square, but this leftover infrastructure, if you will, the older infrastructure. So I find some of the streets, a lot have a hard time handling bigger buildings because there's, when we get into this, oh, you can do zero setback kind of stuff. It's one thing on a good urban street where we've got a nice broad pedestrian zone to work with. But man, when we're down to like 8 feet, 7 feet to the curb, no parking, it feels really uncomfortable to me when I look at residential buildings that have no real kind of transition from the public space to the private space. Lord help you if you live on the ground floor, some of these units where you're at your eye level is almost at curb level, right at curb level there. So the privacy and the kind of way it feels, it seems like there may be more nuance or more increments that we would want to think about in these kind of neighborhoods as we rebuild.
Yeah, Rob, I would offer a similar observation. The typology, the morphology, the scale, I think is very, very well represented in the document that you guys have prepared. Very, very high quality recommendations from you guys. I think what might accompany this plan to help address some of the concerns, Rob, that you just identified is to create a series of street sections with horizontal dimensioning that creates a better definition of the public realm within these rights of way that help achieve those objectives that you just mentioned. Is how do you quantify and qualify the improvement of the public realm district by district, because they, as you know, they differ from district to district, and I think that would be very, very helpful, in achieving the overall planning objective for the West End.
Yep, great, Jefferson. I think we're on those now. And it's interesting too to think about, like Academy Street, for instance, is it blows my mind a little bit about the way it's functioning in the downtown. And as you know, in our criteria, we're trying to keep active uses there, yet there's no parking, very tiny sidewalk. The relationship to that traffic that's doing 45, 50 miles an hour there is really uncomfortable. So, we sort of thought the same thing, even for a street like O'Neill or any of Watson, any of those little streets, that it's probably not coming out of the public realm. It's probably coming out of the private realm, right? To get those relationships to work a little bit smoother. Thanks for that.
Hey, Rob, just to address your prior comment, we're actually going back to in-person meetings starting Thursday for our formal meetings. So we really wanted to get this to be able to get some comments from the board now. But of course, if any of the board members have any further in-depth comments, they can certainly write those to me and I can pass them along to you to help address within the plan.
Great.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, just for further clarification to the board, that this is truly a workshop. And this matter that Rob has brought before us today is for the workshop and for your comments and input.
I definitely have a few comments and input when the time is right.
Time is right.
Good. Well, thank you, Rob. I'm always so impressed by your work. I live in the West End, so I have attended all the previous meetings. So it's the third time I get this presentation. I have had time to think about it very deeply. And I love everything that's being suggested everywhere except for the Cottage District, which I'm most familiar with because I drive Perry Avenue every single day from my house here, more in the, just at the edge of that district. I'm on O'Neill, to Pendleton, and then the Art Center. So I know that street very well. What I'm really concerned about, in all the other little districts, areas that you're talking about, we seem to be adapting to the fact that we're getting more urban, more dense, more things are happening, and we're adapting with more density, doing setback from the street, so we keep the architectural character, but we get more density. And then we get to the cottage district and we're like, oh, let's be careful to keep this all exactly the way it was. And this does not make sense to me. This used to be on the outskirts of downtown. This is pretty much in downtown now, as evidenced by the fact that we're the urban panel. We're looking at this. So this is downtown, and this district, I think, also has to adapt to that new reality. And I see what we're proposing, maintaining a 1 to 2 story single residential scale out there. Well, what's new, what's being built there that's new is largely 3 stories. A lot of what we call 2-story houses that were existing from a long time out there were on raised porches with tall roofs. They read as 3 stories. So I think the 1 to 2 story scale that's being proposed is off. I think we ought to be going for 2 to 4 stories mostly in this area, with maybe the 4th story stepped back from the street as we do on the more business streets. I don't think anybody would build a brand new building 1 story there, because land prices would not support that. That's going to take care of itself.
Sure.
We are very much talking about maintaining character in this neighborhood, and I'm all for that, but I'm very concerned about maintaining the social character of that neighborhood more so than the architectural character. From the existing houses, they are going from the very tiny 1-story that are there up to the much bigger stories that are 3 stories, the older ones that are 3 stories or read 3 stories. You could tell that this was a very diverse neighborhood. It had probably everything from your workers to your bank managers, and quite a mix of people in there. Given the new environment of what's happening downtown, if we maintain the architectural character of smaller scale, we are going to turn this into millionaire row, or with inflation now, I should say multi-millionaire row, and we're going to lose that very nice mix of people that used to live in this character. So for that reason, I very much welcome the Mosaic development that's being proposed there, because it will be favorable to a more diverse set of people, more diverse population within the district. And I think that's very important to the health of our city, to make sure that we keep our populations more diverse in most neighborhoods, and that people who work in the city find places to live near in the city, and that we don't just get millionaire retirees who want to enjoy the park. We want the people who are active working in the city to live near the city. So I deplore a little bit the fact that we're calling this the cottage district, because it brings expectation that it's all just going to be little cottages, which is not an urban land, an urban image at all. So yes, from a social point of view, as well as an architectural point of view, because I think we can very easily find ways to increase density and maintain much of the architectural character. Because I'm not talking about demolishing anything that's there. I'm talking about what we are bringing new there, and whatever we're bringing new there should reflect the new reality of downtown, in my opinion. And I feel very strongly about this. Thank you.
There are a couple things just to talk about what bothered me in looking at the proposals for that district. When we densify in these neighborhoods and we talk about creating great neighborhood fabric too, that density came with it 2 giant surface parking lots, along with its new buildings, no fabric. And that neighborhood's tortured with being able to connect anyway. Ware Street was cut off long ago from Academy, so there's no way to get back and forth. And then we're looking at parking lots in the middle of neighborhoods that we're trying to densify. So we're getting density, but I think we're not getting real density. It's not clean. Suddenly we're routing cars through other residential streets to get to parking garages because that location can't really handle that many cars coming into that building on Academy. And to me, that's the conundrum. If we had fabric there that was better connected, there's no alleys back there, for instance. So when we do 3-story stuff, a lot of times we're getting cars that are, front-facing garages and cars that are in driveways or parking lots that are across the street from someone else's house. So it's just a messy situation over there, Danielle. I think the 3-story thing is a really, really good point. I think that's right. But when I go through each of those blocks and say, well, what can you do here to increase the density? Certainly you can make it all attached housing. But a lot of those blocks are so narrow, you're not going to, to get in the back of them you're going to have to take every lot, otherwise we're doing this thing where we're just loading. There's no transition between the front door and the edge of the street because it's just too tiny. So I think that's for me, the conundrum in that little district. Actually, Perry Avenue has the most depth to it, where you could probably do something of a larger scale. But there's not much of that property. But I hear you. I think it's just it's a classic conundrum. Because also we get back comments, particularly from our elected leadership too, that this really, represents the end of any real affordability and character that was there. And so there's this, mourning of the loss of that. So this seemed like one of those fragments where you had all this investment coming in. Yeah, should you densify? You betcha. But what's the right building types? When we got into the apartment buildings that can't park themselves under their footprint, then, somewhere in there, we got to make a decision whether or not that's the right thing too.
This Carmela, I would
compromises, yes.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Danielle said, and I do appreciate your response, Rob, completely. I know it is tough, sometimes impossible, but very tough to make those kind of solutions work, or however that needs to move forward. That could be a serious challenge, and I do appreciate the difficulty of that. But I just wanted to voice that I agree completely with everything that Danielle said. So
great.
Yeah, this is John. I would say I'm on board with the 2 previous comments, with the exception that, with greater density comes challenges in how you integrate automobiles both into the traffic pattern, say along Perry or Ware, and then how you deal with the cars once you park them, because a lot of those parcels in there, with the exception of Mosaic, don't really, even if combined with adjacent parcels, offer a great remedy for how you can get both, the density that Danielle and Carmela are asking for without having some, downstream consequences that are also undesirable. And I think, the challenge is that we kind of want to have it both ways. And I don't know what the best answer to that is.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's a conundrum. It's like you say, you guys know, it's always a trade-off. When when we just take the first principles of, it doesn't matter what the building type is, of great neighborhoods where fronts face fronts, backs face backs. You know, you're all servicing at the same place. That's a real, for me, that's a real clean screen when we're looking at, you know, all kinds of proposals that are coming in, and you know, these are tortured little lots, right? And people put together the most amazing series of available land, you know, to come up with a scale that works. So, you know, I think keeping fundamentals intact is a good one. It always comes back to bite you in the end when you sort of go rogue on some of those. And you know, I look on the other side of Pendleton and I see the patterns of the past, you know, which sort of ignored street frontage altogether. And so they developed internal blocks and the rear ends are facing the side streets. And that, you know, that just, it gets to be nightmarish to try to produce a cohesive place that's, whether or not the scale can change. But when it's interrupted by surface parking lots, and then it gets really weird about what's backyard and front yard. Where are the park spaces? Oh, they're buried way back in there. You know, it makes it challenging for sure.
And I guess my only other comment initially is, you know, it goes back to this public realm, private realm discussion where, you know, getting the right setbacks so that we imply a public realm that may or may not really exist is going to be tricky all the way through the various precincts. You know, just because we think of building to the edge of a property, and I think you've alluded to this in some of the things you said earlier, but that's not the reality that we have in some of these areas where the public realm is too small with respect to the building outcomes. You know, that it may need some TLC on figuring out what setbacks need to occur to make it look like there are no setbacks. And you know, Jeff's comment about getting some street sections in may help with that a little bit, to study, you know, where the flaws are in some of these narrower streets.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it is tricky, but it's sort of the same issue you had about door swings right out into the public realm on the sidewalk, right? So that because that's never a great thing either. So I just think we'll try to work our way through it. I'm especially concerned about Academy Street too. I look at Trailside, the apartments that just up the street from us. And that's not a great urban circumstance there. And I think looking at the apartment building coming into Mosaic, you know, that's a tough problem for them because we're pretty tight against the street, but it's not a street that you can love to live on. You know what I mean? If you walk on the sidewalks on Academy Street, that is not a pleasant experience. So yeah, John, I think it will take a lot of TLC, and it is nuanced, and it's not going to be easy. But I think we need to do it because if you're all residential, you know, and a lot of those, then, you know, it feels really awkward at some points, just because the streets are what they are, and we're not remaking the street sections necessarily. You know, it might be improving the sidewalk, but we're not adding right of way and that sort of thing.
Right.
I was just gonna speak up for a minute. I am actually 10 minutes late for my next meeting. So I was wondering if anyone else has any brief comments before is there anything else on the agenda, Austin?
There's nothing else on the agenda, but if anyone had any further comments, you can send those to me and I can forward them on to Rob, and we can do it that way. If anyone had any detailed comments or anything.
Thank you so much, Rob. Unless does anyone else have anything they want to say quickly before we adjourn? No?
Thank you.
Okay.
I just want again to say congratulations to Rob for, I mean, an enormous amount of work that went into this presentation and how responsive you've been from the first couple of meetings that we've had with this, the adjustments I see. That's fantastic. Thank you so much, Rob.
You're welcome. Thank you guys for taking the time. And thanks for all your work here.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. We'll call this meeting adjourned.
Thank you, everyone. See you Thursday, and thank you, Rob, for joining us today.
Sure. Thanks, Austin, so much. See you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.